Welcome to this daily PBJ devotional. Read 2 Chronicles 30 and Zechariah 12:1 through 13:1. This devotional is about 2 Chronicles chapter 30. Then Hezekiah sent word throughout all Israel and Judah, and he also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem to keep the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. For the king and his officials and the whole assembly in Jerusalem had decided to keep the Passover in the second month, since they had been unable to keep it at the regular time, because not enough priests had consecrated themselves, and the people had not been gathered in Jerusalem. This plan pleased the king and the whole assembly. So they established a decree to circulate a proclamation throughout Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, that the people should come to keep the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel, in Jerusalem. For they had not observed it in great numbers as prescribed. At the command of the king, the couriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his officials, which read, "Children of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, so that he may return to those of you who remain, who have escaped the grasp of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your fathers and brothers, who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their fathers, so that he made them an object of horror, as you can see. Now do not stiffen your necks as your fathers did. Submit to the Lord and come to his sanctuary, which he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. For if you return to the Lord, your brothers and sons will receive mercy in the presence of their captors, and will return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. He will not turn his face away from you if you return to him." And the couriers traveled from city to city throughout the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as Zebulun. But the people scorned and mocked them. Nevertheless, some from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Moreover, the power of God was on the people in Judah to give them one heart to obey the command of the king and his officials, according to the word of the Lord. In the second month, a very great assembly gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. They proceeded to remove the altars in Jerusalem and to take away the incense altars and throw them into the Kidron Valley. And on the 14th day of the second month, they slaughtered the Passover lamb. The priests and Levites were ashamed, and they consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the house of the Lord. They stood at their prescribed posts, according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests splattered the blood, which they received from the hands of the Levites. Since there were many in the assembly who had not consecrated themselves, the Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover lambs for every unclean person to consecrate the lambs to the Lord. A large number of the people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, had not purified themselves, yet they ate the Passover, contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah interceded for them, saying, "May the Lord, who is good, provide atonement for everyone who sets his heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of his fathers, even if he is not cleansed according to the purification rules of the sanctuary." And the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem celebrated the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days with great joy, and the Levites and priests praised the Lord day after day, accompanied by loud instruments of praise to the Lord. And Hezekiah encouraged all the Levites, who performed skillfully before the Lord. For 7 days they ate their assigned portion, sacrificing peace offerings and giving thanks to the Lord, the God of their fathers. The whole assembly agreed to observe 7 more days. So they observed 7 days with joy. For Hezekiah king of Judah contributed 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep for the assembly. And the officials contributed 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep for the assembly. And a great number of priests consecrated themselves. Then the whole assembly of Judah rejoiced, along with the priests and Levites, and the whole assembly that had come from Israel, including the foreigners who had come from Israel and those who lived in Judah. So there was great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for nothing like this had happened since the days of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Then the priests and the Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard their voice, and their prayer came into his holy dwelling place in heaven. This is God's word. The revival and reformation in Judah that we read about yesterday continued in this chapter. The new aspect of this revival was a desire to celebrate the Passover, which we read about today. God had commanded Israel to observe the Passover every year, so that the nation and each succeeding generation would remember God's miraculous extraction of his people from slavery in Egypt. But beginning with Solomon, God's people wandered away from obedience to God's laws. That disobedience included not observing the feast days, like the Passover, which God had commanded in his law. We saw this in verse 26, which said, "There was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem." The span of time between Solomon and Hezekiah was something like 200 years. So God's people had no personal history to guide them. They didn't have memories of celebrating the Passover with their families yearly, so they were unprepared to celebrate this festival to the Lord properly. Their unpreparedness was described for us in verses 2 and 3, as well as in verses 17 through 19. In their excitement to celebrate the Passover, these unprepared people actually broke God's laws concerning the Passover. It was Hezekiah's prayer for them that saved them from God's wrath, according to verse 20. God was merciful to them because Hezekiah prayed for them, and because their hearts were right even though their actions were not. Good motives are not an excuse for habitual disobedience to God's word. But God is often merciful when his people act out of love for him, even if they don't always obey all of his laws correctly. What strikes me in this passage is how much better it is to build godly habits and maintain them. Regular church attendance is important, in my view, for maintaining your walk with God. It is one of several habits of godliness that a Christian needs in order to grow. However, there are many Christians who attend church sporadically and haphazardly. They attend now and then, maybe once a month. Then they come for a few weeks in a row before dropping back to old, inconsistent patterns. It is much harder to start a godly habit, like Passover observance or church attendance, than it is to keep doing a habit that your parents and their parents established a long time ago. But if you've fallen out of practicing a godly habit, the best time to change that is now. It might not have been the correct time to observe the Passover. You can see verse 3 about that. But it was better to restart the observance as soon as possible than to continue to live in disobedience to the Lord. So, what's the status of your habits as a Christian? By all means, continue to maintain the godly habits you have. But if you need to start a good, godly habit, do it now. Don't wait for the beginning of the new year. Start today and keep it going by doing it again tomorrow. Or if it's a Sunday thing, week after week. Consider what habits need to change in your life. And I'll see you next time. May God bless you. Hope you have a great day today.